stays in Congress and has clout. That maybe actually the weird thing about this is that the reverse is true, that it's actually worse because you don't have somebody who can actually do things. What do you think about that?
Well, I will tell you that the interesting thing, I had a sign on the outside of my door that said, this office belongs to the people of the 25th district. I really believe that. So
Regardless of the occupant of the office.
regardless of the occupant
Right.
of the office, I think that people are allowed in a democracy to people make their choice.
Yeah.
And they set the priority. If their priority is, I mean, I laugh at, I can think of some members of Congress from Texas who ran on term limits, and that was, and their term limits ran out years ago,
Right.
and they stayed. But, again, if the voters of the district choose that, I mean, they choose their priorities. They'd rather have X or Y or Z, and
Doesn't make a difference.
that office belongs to the people of that district.
At the presidential level, if I've done my homework properly, Bush won this district twice. Bush beat Gore in this district, and Bush beat Kerry in this district. Obama beat McCain in this district, but Romney won the year that you won.
Correct.
Right?
Correct. So did Ted Cruz.
And Ted Cruz. The presidential race is obviously not just because in a presidential year turnout is higher, but this presidential campaign particularly has been a backdrop for this campaign, has it not?
This presidential campaign has been different only to the extent that it has stirred the pot locally. I will tell you, when I ran, I was comfortable just with the presidential election and the normal presidential turnout.
Yeah.
But the choice of nominees, I think, on both parties has really helped us stir interest in the election. And when there's interest, there's turnout.
Yeah.
And when there's turnout, I think Democrats.
You saw yesterday, the Secretary of State's office announced that registration at least was the highest it's ever been. They expect it may actually hit 15 million. That doesn't mean that we're going to have every one of those people vote, but I think we broke a record in the primary, and the expectation is the turnout will be higher again.
Well, you always lose people between the registration table and the voting booth.
Yeah.
You don't. But I will tell you, I haven't looked at the numbers recently, but when I looked at them this summer, voter registration just in the 29 counties of the 23rd was up by about 25% over the numbers that had registered in the presidential election 4 years prior. About a little over 50% of that was Latino surname.
Yeah.
And for me, the interesting part was that fully a quarter of the new registrants came from 4 counties, and therefore border counties where I tend to get about 70%.
Yeah. And you think that's directly related to the issues at play in this national campaign and to this
Well,
specific choice of candidates?
I think that clearly has had an impact. I mean, you can't talk about a border wall every day and double down on the border security and the immigration issues and those kinds of things and not expect to see some impact in areas along the border where people live that, but that's the reality every day.
You subscribe to the theory that this is basically just about turnout, that the outcomes of these elections in presidential years, Republicans have tended to turn out about 35,000 more, Democrats have tended to turn out about 45,000 more, 08 and 12 versus 10 and 14. Registration, or the turnout rather, goes down in those off years. Do you just attribute it to that? Is that what this has been about, turnout?
Well, I think turnout is critical. It's certainly a big factor. For me, 2 years ago, turnout was down by 41% across the board.
Yeah.
If you look at the Democratic counties like El Paso as an example, turnout was down by 51 or 52%. It was down by more than half.
Yeah.
So turnout is clearly an issue. I mean, it was 2,400 or so votes.
Right.
I laughing and told people I have that many cousins. I mean, it's just
You need to get every one of those countries to vote, right?
So it is but I think there are other factors too. I mean, the national environment, the local environment, what's going on, are there other races? There's a lot of things that draw people to the polls.
Right, but of course in Texas right now, there are really no other races. This is it. Other than the presidential and your race, right? I mean, there's a couple of legislative seats that are in play, but basically, you're all the action, right?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you know it, it's true. Why are you doing this again? You did the one term. Obviously, you wanted to be returned to that seat in 2014, didn't happen. What about it appeals to you that you want to do it again?
Well, I still see the same issue that I wanted to work on. When I was in the legislature, I was the guy that brought people together. That skill set, I think, is a skill set that Congress desperately what's going on in DC. I get frustrated. I mean, I'll give you a current example. I mean, I have a son who's 11, and I still remember when my Lena was pregnant, how special we felt, and how careful she and I both were. I mean, I didn't let her mop a floor, I didn't let her pick up a grocery bag, I didn't let her do, I mean, it was just an incredible time in our lives. And now you think that with one mosquito bite, all of that changes. The parents' life changes, the kids' life changes. And yet Congress can't agree on a Zika package because there's an amendment that says, oh, we ought to be able to fly the Confederate flag at military cemeteries, or, you know, we want to kill Planned Parenthood. And so all of these other issues are put on the table.
Right.
With Zika. And why would you be?
Do you think it's only one side doing it? You know, the Republicans have been saying for weeks that it's the Democrats who are holding up the Zika bill. Democrats have been saying that the Republicans are holding up the Zika bill. That's why everybody hates Congress.
That's exactly why everybody hates Congress, because it's not a plain Zika bill. If it was a plain Zika bill, it would
give an up or down vote, up or down vote.
Up or down vote, and frankly, the leadership controls what's in a bill, right? Leadership controls who passes a bill, who doesn't pass a bill, they control who authors the bill. The leadership gets to make all of these determinations, and the leadership, I mean, it's very hard for me to sit back and watch. I don't really like to get into the finger pointing and the blame thing. That was never my deal, but I would point out that statistically, the Republicans have the biggest majority in the House than they've had since Herbert Hoover was president. And I would dare say, as I look around the room, there's not a single person in here who was alive when Herbert Hoover was president. And so with that single biggest majority that they've ever had, they ought to be able to pass a Zika bill out of the House. I mean, it's just
Given the number of votes they've got in both the House and the Senate, anything that doesn't happen, they have to own, you think?
Absolutely.
Right.
You know, Governor Bush and then President Bush used to talk about it in terms of personal responsibility, and I think members have to assume some personal responsibility.
Right.
When the government shut down while I was in Congress, I mean, I assumed personal responsibility for it. I didn't, you know, when my salary came to me for those weeks that the government was shut down, I gave it all away. I donated it to charity because I didn't think we should be paid for not working. I didn't think Congress should be paid for not working. I think there should be some accountability. I think there should be some responsibility. I think that's only there.
You know how this works. You've run for office a number of times. When you're the challenger, and you are the challenger, even though you've been an incumbent in this seat, when you're the challenger,
I wouldn't suggest it every time, but I'm
so you're not supposed to. When you're the challenger, you're running against somebody who's in the job, and your belief implicitly, if not explicitly, is that person is not doing what he should be doing for our constituents. What is the negative case against Will Hurd other than I, Pete Gallego, want to be returned to Congress?
Where do I start?
Well, I mean, any place, start any place. What has he done wrong? What has he done that he shouldn't have done? What has he not done that he should have done?
Well, we can talk both on the global view and then we can talk on the local view.
I've got no place to be.
Let's talk on the global view. The global view is it's a 50-50 district, right? More or less, it's the only competitive thing. So you would think that the person who represents that 50-50 district, the reason that I like competitive districts is I think it forces people to moderate, right? You can't be too far to the left, you can't be too far to the right. Mr. Hurd's voting record is further to the right than Ted Cruz's. It's further to the right than Louis Gohmand's. He has a 96, 97% straight party voting record. It's very hard for me to understand how you can do that or why you would do that in a district that is a borderline district. I was named as the single most bipartisan member of my freshman class because my voting record was just under 75% straight Democratic, so that I voted with the Republicans, essentially rounding off about 1 out of every 4 votes. If the Republicans were right, I voted with them. And I think that's what people expect. I don't think people identify with parties one way or the other. I think, frankly, most everybody's somewhere in the middle, and people are disgusted by the politics as usual of the parties.
Give me a specific, Mr. Gallego, give me a specific vote, or give me more than one specific vote that you can tell me falls into the bucket that you're talking about. A vote where Congressman Hurd chose to go with the party as opposed to the district.
Well, that's an easy one for me because Big Bend National Park.
Big Bend National
Park is really the center of the local economy in West Texas. I mean, it's a tourism-based economy. Amtrak stops in El Paso, stops in Alpine, stops in Del Rio, and stops in San Antonio. We don't have, in Alpine, by the way, bus service because the buses go on the interstate. Tourists would get to us, many of them, if they don't drive, they get there by Amtrak. Right? So, Mr. Sessions of Dallas, who is in the leadership, right, chairman of the Rules Committee, puts forth an amendment, that's the party's position on, and he essentially shuts down the Sunset Limited line that goes through Texas. Well, the only Republican that voted for shutting down the Amtrak in his own district was Mr. Hurd. And he did that because the party was doing that. And, you know, when you put the party in front of the people that you represent,
Yeah.
I think that's a bad thing. I mean, you know, you look at the, it's just a very different philosophy. The buzzwords that I was trained under, the buzzwords that I learned was voting your district. Vote your district. That's what, I kind of came of age under Speaker Laney. I had the privilege of being in the legislature under what I think historians will consider the renaissance of the legislature. And that was that's what we told everybody.
Did you do that, Mr. Gallego? I remember your time in the legislature. Did you do that here? Did you buck the party here and vote your district? The district you represented in West Texas in the legislature was not a 50-50 district, but you definitely represented some people who didn't agree with you.
Oh, I will tell you that I had a more, by the numbers, I represented a more conservative, a more Republican district in the State House than the congressional district is.
Is that right?
It is.
So you were willing to buck your speaker or buck the party at that time?
Absolutely.
Right. Can you point to a specific vote you cast? I asked you about a specific vote of Mr. Hurd's. Give me an example, since you cite your bipartisan tendencies in the Congress. Give me an example when you were in Congress when you bucked the Democratic Party on behalf of your district.
That's not hard for me. Again, I grew up in the restaurant business. It's a small business.
Right.
It was a family-owned restaurant. When the Affordable Care Act changed the definition of what is or isn't a full-time employee, that was an issue that the small businesses, particularly the Restaurant Association, which I have been particularly close to as my dad had been a member, when they came to me and they said, this is really hurtful and here's why this is really hurtful. The Democrats obviously did not want to change the definition of for purposes of the Affordable Care Act. I joined in and I voted for the small businesses and voted.
Buck the party, buck the White House.
Absolutely.
As far as
absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You don't get to be the most bipartisan member of Congress by siding with your party all the time. I mean, that defeats the whole.
So the problem with Mr. Hurd, as you see it, Mr. Gallego, is he's too partisan, and he's too partisan at the expense of his district.
Well, I don't think he represents the district very well.
Right. His people and the people who support him, and there are, not only people in the district who support him, but there's a lot of interest in this race in Washington. They like Mr. Hurd. They think of him as actually a member with potential going forward. They say, well, he's an expert on cybersecurity, his service in the Central Intelligence Agency. He has specific expertise that at a very dangerous time in the world may be of use, not just to his district, which itself has quite a lot of interest in cybersecurity and military matters. This is military city, San Antonio. But that it's useful to have somebody with that set of experience in the world. Do you disrespect or dismiss the value of that experience?
I don't disrespect Mr. Hurd's service in the CIA. I believe that the skill set required for the CIA is a different skill set that is required for public services and elected officials. They're just different skill sets. San Antonio was military city USA before Wilbur came along. It will be military city USA after Wilbur leaves.
Yep.
The interesting thing to me is I believe we should give credit where credit is due, and I'll give you a couple of examples. The core of the new developing cyber economy in San Antonio is the standing up of the new 25th Air Force Base. Well, that was done while I was in Congress, right? That happened. I was the member of the Armed Services. I worked with the military.
Right.
There was a real competition about where that headquarters, where that Air Force would be located, and we got it for San Antonio. Now, it is true that the ribbon cutting kind of things, the announcements, all of those kinds of things were made in January, I think, of 2015.
Right.
Mr. Hurd has been in office all of 2 weeks, so clearly it wasn't his work.
Yeah.
So, you know, the skill set that is required to be a member of Congress is different, and I really believe that my skill set is something that, for this period of time,
Right.
when people are so at each other's throats, we need people who will
Right.
help put the fire out instead of sending people who add fuel to the fire.
I asked the Hurd campaign, won't come as any surprise to you, I said, what's the case against Pete? And they said he didn't do anything when he was in Congress. He didn't pass a bill. He basically went for 2 years and didn't do anything. Now, this is not a conversation that I've heard for the first time. You know, we looked at the last legislative session, and there was a lot of talk about the fact that some of the relatively new members of the Texas Senate went through an entire session that were much louder than they were productive. I don't think Connie Burton, Bob Hall, and there was maybe one other member of the Senate maybe passed one bill over the course of the entire session between them. And the response back is that you don't measure the effectiveness of a legislator by the number of bills they pass. But I want to give you an opportunity to respond to that, because they say you were do-nothing Pete for the one term you were in Congress, and that you didn't really have a record that you could run on now. What do you say about that?
You know, no one's ever run against me by saying nice things about me.
Yeah.
And frankly, I tell my staff all the time that nobody tries to tackle you unless they think you have the ball. So every time somebody comes out and these new ads come out and more money is poured in, I view it as a compliment. But here's what I will tell you, is that there's more than one way to skin a cat. You can go to a chairman and say, will you do me a favor? And can you put some language into your original bill that will take care of my issues? You can offer an amendment. You can have other people do different things. You can go to the agency and say, I have this program that I really like to start. I have a bill going through, but you have an opportunity to do it in the rulemaking process.
Yeah.
Can you do it in the rulemaking process? It is particularly important, for example, the Congress gave away its authority to spend money in individual districts when they did away with the earmarks. So now, all of that goes through the executive branch, right? And by the way, the executive branch is currently in Democratic hands. So my ability to work with grants and doing things for the district. So I did things in a very different way. Look, Anna Richards used to call me a workhorse and not a show horse, which I wore as a badge of honor. But clearly, as I take off things, we fixed the drainage issue at Laughlin Air Force Base with an amendment that I offered to the National Defense Authorization. We were able to enhance the Secretary of Defense's authority to hire caregivers. Yeah. Because when people are injured in the line of duty, the first people they see are DoD healthcare workers. And his power to expedite the hiring and those kinds of things and keeping people designating the emergency, that was going away. As I look at the different things that I did across the board in other areas, there were some things that I'm very proud of.
But we're not visible necessarily to people who simply count the number of bills that you pass.
Well, I will tell you, I worry. I'm hopeful that Mr. Hurd has great insurance so that he doesn't pull his shoulder out patting himself on the back.
Yeah.
That just wasn't my.
I'm interested in you saying that a lot of the decisions that ultimately affect your district are now done through the executive rather than the legislative branch in the way that this all goes. That comes back to this question of the presidential race as a backdrop to this campaign. If a Democrat is in the White House in January, and a Democrat is representing this district, the Democrat in Congress has an opportunity to get things, pardon me, from this process in a way differently than if the person in Congress is from a different party. Then, is that right? I mean, that's an interesting. How is your relationship with Secretary Clinton? You are You're with her, right? Fully on board.
From the beginning, absolutely.
Nothing about her, nothing about this campaign gives you pause, nothing that would cause you to hesitate to talk her up in this district.
I look at the options,
Yeah.
and it is very clear to me that, you know.
But you're voting for her, not against him.
Oh,
You
I'm
are,
voting for.
you are affirmatively for her.
Absolutely.
You made a big issue of the fact that he hasn't endorsed Trump. Your campaign has.
Well, I will tell you that he fancies himself an expert on national security. The single individual that has more to do with national security than anyone else is the President of the United States.
Right.
And this election, more than any other, I think, is a question of who's fit to serve. Who do you trust in this line?
Right.
This is a question, who do you trust with their finger on the nuclear button? And that's a pretty basic question. And when Mr. Hurd isn't willing to answer that question, when he's on TV, on film, running away, literally running away from a CNN crew so that he won't have to answer that question, I think people notice that. In fact,
Of course, he says, and his people say he's answered it. What they've said is, I have a problem with the language he uses when talking about minorities. I have a problem with his record up to this point of talking about foreign policy, and until such time as he puts himself on the right path, I'm not endorsing him. He's not the only person in the party to take that position. I mean, Ted Cruz, John Kasich.
Well, I happen to think that taking no position, not endorsing, is sticking your finger to the wind and waiting until.
You think it's a cop-out?
I absolutely do think it's a cop-out. I mean, Governor Kasich, who is campaigning with Mr. Hurd, I think on Saturday. You have to have respect for the fact that Governor Kasich is upfront about the fact that he's not supporting Trump, he's not working with him, and I found it ironic that Mr. Hurd would invite Governor Kasich, but perhaps Governor Kasich can talk to him and inject a little courage into his spine and get Mr. Hurd to take a position on that.
I want to ask you about some issues related to this race and that will be important to your district and important to the country, because obviously you're not just running to beat Will Hurd. If you were able to do that, you're running to do stuff. We've been talking about that. We have seen 2 American cities this week blow up over incidents involving law enforcement and race. This has been a persistent conversation in this country. Charlotte over the last couple of days has really been, 2 or 3 paces away from riot conditions, and we've had, we had a death yesterday, or we think we had a death. I mean, there was reporting that there was a death, and then reporting, maybe there wasn't a death. But yeah, a very, very bad and difficult situation. What has happened, and what can you as a member of Congress, or what can our government do, what should we do to try to get ahead of this? We have 6 of the 20 largest cities in the country in Texas, to the degree that the problem of race and law enforcement is a big city issue. We are absolutely at risk of seeing that issue migrate into our cities. So what do we do?
Well, I think you saw the potential for that with the Sandra Bland incident. I think that's clearly out there. I mean, we saw a really horrendous occurrence in Dallas. So we're clearly not immune from those kinds of things. But I will tell you that the way not to handle that is to create a new special congressional committee that is supposed to, I think these things are handled best on the local level. There has to be a dialogue between the law enforcement community that I was a part of when I was a prosecutor, and the folks at large, which I'm part of them. There has to be this rebuilding of trust. When I was a kid, as an example, you had even coloring books that showed you that the policeman was your friend. Well, there are not very many parents today that teach their kids that the policeman is their friend.
Is it because we're not doing it? We're not teaching it? We're not messaging that? Or is it because the policemen are not our friends?
No, I think the challenge in law enforcement, as it is in every other profession, I can't tell you as a Catholic that every priest is bad, but there are bad priests. I can't tell you that every lawyer is bad, but there are bad lawyers. I can't tell you that vast majority of people who serve in those roles do so honorably and well and are great public servants. But it only, you know, the thing is, in our society, we focus many times on the negative.
On the bad apples, right?
And so, really, I mean, I think we've got to do a better job
Yeah.
at talking to each other and finding those bad apples. And people have to have a level of comfort about having the dialogue.
But you think primarily this is an issue decided and dealt with at the local level, but not
I'm a big believer in
and not in Congress.
in dealing things,
Right.
in dealing with things locally, because I think every community is different. There's no
Yeah.
one size fits all.
Well, an issue, Mr. Gallego, that is playing out in cities, or just again this week played out in cities, but is not a local issue, it can't be a local issue, is the question of terror.
Right.
Terrorism in cities. We had incidents in New York and New Jersey, we had an incident in Minnesota that is assumed to be somehow connected to terrorism. I mean, local response notwithstanding, this is not a local issue. Again, you as a member of Congress, one of the 535, have got to deal with what the country's response to this issue is. What are we not doing that we should be doing? How do we make people feel safe? How do we know that there's not something else around the corner?
Well, you know, if there's one thing that is uncertain, it is life. I mean, you know, to some extent, you're always going to have to worry. The question is, how upfront is that worry? I will tell you that there are several things that we could be doing. When I drive through the checkpoint in Uvalde or the checkpoint outside of Sierra Blanca, or even in Alpine and Marfa, there's a big flashing neon sign that says that they're taking applications for Border Patrol. We have so many vacancies in Border Patrol and Customs. I mean, we don't have the personnel that we need along the border. People are transferring out on a regular basis. They're rotating through. We need to be able to hire the people that it takes to do the job on the border. If you go,
Is the issue that we don't have enough people, or we don't have enough money to hire those people?
well, that's the second part, right? If you look at the facilities that we have, if you look at the bridge, for example, in Eagle Pass,
Yeah.
and you compare it to the new bridge in El Paso County outside of Tornillo, or even the one next door in Del Rio, you will see this huge difference in technology. We haven't spent on the infrastructure that we need to inspect the trucks, to do the different kinds of things that, you know, we have, I think, on the entire Texas-Mexico border, one place where, and I think that's Laredo, if I recall correctly, where it essentially does, it's more than an X-ray, but it looks at the trucks and helps figure out if they're carrying any contraband. Those kinds of investments in our infrastructure and our safety, I think, are important, and Congress is unwilling to make them. And
Well, as
yet-
you know, because you pay attention still to what happens back home, we've had kind of a loud discussion about this issue here in the legislature. Legislature made a decision to spend $800 million on border security, which was not all for boots on the ground. DPS has now asked for another $1 billion in the next budget. It sounds like maybe you agree with the idea that Texas ought to be appropriating more money for border security, so we can do things like make the bridges all technologically up to date and do the same kind of checkpoint that we have in Laredo in other places.
Well, I think if you ask any Republican what a federal government is for, what a federal government should be doing,
Yeah.
they would tell you that the first obligation is to keep the country safe. So I would tell you that even as a Democrat, that it's the federal government's job to be out there on the border, to make sure that our borders are manned appropriately, to make sure that we have the right facilities and the right equipment, to make sure that we take care of our homeland. On the state level, it seems to me that $1 billion is really, really critically needed in areas like public education. You know, there's some long-term investments that I think Texas has failed.
So you think the federal government needs to do more on this than not the state?
But I don't think it's the state's responsibility to do those kinds of things. I will tell you that I have, my experience on the border, you know, I grew up in a border county, and I've grown up out there.
Yeah.
I've known it all my life. And as the nature of the border and the border crossings have changed, as the nature of our world has changed, then it seems to me that we need to change with it. And part of that change is the technology that goes along with the advancements, to be able to stop some of these people in their tracks. We need that on border. Ann Richards used to say that that border wasn't the back door into the United States, it was the front door. One of the things that I've always appreciated about our capital is that it faces south. And I really believe that that's our front door, and I think we need to guard it better, but we need to put some infrastructure into it.
This is a district with quite a number of miles along the border.
It's 2/3 of the Texas-Mexico border.
Right. Is that the most important issue? Is immigration and border security the most important issue to this district?
You know, I'm always hesitant to say that there's any one issue that's the most important, because it depends on where you are. I would argue that jobs and the economy, you know, frankly, economic security is just as important to a lot of people as the other kinds of security.
What is the federal government not doing in the area of economic security that it ought to be doing? If you could go in and make 2 or 3 or 4 things a priority to try to get ahead of the economic security issue that affect your district, what would they do?
Well, I would think I would put more emphasis on small businesses, because that's what is in the district. I mean, whether you, with the exception of the Toyota plant, for example, in the south side of San Antonio, I mean, the other businesses are all small businesses. The Export-Import Bank that helps people export-import, Mr. Hurd wasn't in favor of the Export-Import Bank. That was a big deal in San Antonio. I would help small businesses develop and grow. Mr. Hurd chose to resign as a member of the Small Business Committee. You know, when you're in Congress, the more committees that you're on, the more areas of influence that you can have. And by getting off of that Small Business Committee, he essentially abandoned his ability to do things for small business. All of these kinds of things. I mean, I guess it's just a function of my small business background, whether it was growing up in a restaurant to having a private law practice, where you're faced with a lot of these decisions every day that the government can make your life easier if they would, for example, increase the tax credit for the Affordable Care Act, so that it covered more people and lasted longer. That would help small businesses a lot.
You're gonna raise the minimum wage, would you raise the minimum wage?
I would clearly raise the minimum wage.
How does small business feel about
I
that?
think there has to be a livable wage.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, most of the businesses that, if you look at Alpine, for example, most of them are governed by the state minimum wage, not by the federal minimum wage, because of their size. And those who are governed by the federal minimum wage, I think they can do it. I really believe that there's something wrong when people are working 2 or 3 jobs and just barely getting by. There's something wrong when 2 spouses, right? When you have a 2-income household and you're still struggling to get by. All of these kinds of things, I think people worry about, and rightfully so. I mean, I know that, for Madeleine and for me, I mean, as Nicolas, we have 7 years to get ready for him to go off to college, and we're still trying to figure out, make sure that we're gonna have enough money to pay for it when he gets there.
Well, good thing you're not working in the legislature. Part B of the economic security question as it relates to what you might do in Congress is about taxes. And of course, we talk about taxes always, but especially during a presidential campaign, fighting over whether we got to cut taxes for the middle class, raise taxes on upper income Americans. What would Congressman Gallego do on a tax question for his district?
There's no question. My frustration as just a normal, everyday, working American is that there are programs, if you're on the very bottom of the socioeconomic scale, chances are there's a program that will help you. If you're at the very top end of the socioeconomic scale, then you don't get it. But everybody else in the middle, they feel the squeeze. And so for me, the first priority is to rebuild the middle class, because the middle class is what really created the strength of America. If you look at the burgeoning middle class after World War II, for example, I mean, you see what happens to the economy. So clearly, incentivizing that middle class, tax cuts for the middle class, making sure that we treat them fairly, that we incentivize the behaviors that we need to grow the economy. All of that is.
Agnes, we need to go to questions, do we not? Let's walk the microphone around. We'll take questions from the audience. I may jump in with another question or 2 here before we're done. If you've got questions,